those are saints. Those are people that make a difference. And if you want to be part of that, I can't think of a higher calling, because I'm one that was saved. You've heard the story of the starfish, and you can't save all of them. But I'm one of the ones that got thrown back in the water and was able to heal and have a family and do so much that I never envisioned when I was a kid on the streets of California.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Welcome, faithful listeners, viewers, to the Miracles from the Hill podcast. If you're new, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Like and subscribe. Hit all the buttons that are somewhere on the page somewhere. Today we have an amazing experience talking to my friend Bob Polito. Bob, welcome.
Good to be here.
So, Bob, pretend like you and I just met on the top of the Empire State Building, and you've got to tell me who you are in 2 sentences. Who's Bob Polito?
I am Bob Polito. I'm a grandfather, a father, and a Miracle Hill Ministries employee.
And a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and a husband.
Yeah.
And all-around great guy.
That goes with a father and grandfather.
Yeah, that's true. And an IT guru.
Not a guru, but I do IT. So.
And a science fiction book
I like
fan.
sci-fi, yeah. Science fiction books, fantasy books.
Yeah. Bob and I share that in common, so we talk about books from time to time. He got me started reading a book series, which I won't go into, but it's real long.
And he still hasn't finished it.
I've not finished it. I'm like 5 books in.
Right.
On how many books?
14, I think.
14 long books. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for being here. So we're going to jump in and hear a little bit about Bob's story, which kind of has a unique aspect to it that correlates to what we do at Miracle Hill. So we're going to kind of focus on that when we get to it. But Bob, where'd you grow up?
I was born in Sacramento, California. I had 3 sisters, a mom, and a grandma. I never met my dad. Never met really any other family but my sisters and my mom and grandma. My grandmother was actually wealthy. I found out this weekend that she knew the governor of California, and we visited him. And during those years when my grandmother was alive, when I was 3 and 4 years old, we lived with her, and evidently they were very good years. I have very few memories from those days and all. But when Grandma died, our family pretty much fell apart. My mom got into cults and drugs and a lot of other things that I won't go into, but during that time, we were neglected. She'd live other places and leave money for us for food in our apartments, and that money would be used inappropriately by, some people, and I would end up not having anything to eat, and we'd have to steal to eat. And the house I can remember one time when I went in the kitchen, we had to start moving things around because there was a lot of trash everywhere, and there were maggots crawling up the wall and those kind of things. So they were tough years. And by the time I was 8 years old in that area, the police were looking for me because I was going in people's properties and taking their fruit from their backyards because that's where the food was and everything. And so I learned how to shoplift. Back then they didn't have computer receipts. And so I, as a young child, I learned to get the receipts and put them in the bags, carry the bags in, hidden,
Fill the bag.
and then put the bags with stuff at the same price where I could walk out and everything that way. And first time I shoplifted, though, I knew nothing of that, and I tried to walk out with a Monopoly game under my T-shirt. So that didn't work so well, by the way. And so
you did not go
no,
directly
I didn't.
to jail.
I went direct. No, they scared me half to death with that, though. But that motivated me not to stop because I was still hungry, but to get good. Okay.
So the question of where was God as a child, I think you kind of answered that with there was cult's presence. What do you mean by that?
I can remember having to be in front of a box and kneel in front of this box and say the words Nam-myoho Renge-kyo over and over and over. I hated that box, okay, by the way. And I can remember going to a Catholic school for a little while and getting to know the nuns. By the way, they can be very skilled with a yardstick, I found out. and I deserved it. But anyway, so I had a lot of different experiences. I hadn't seen most of my family for a lot of years, and my birthday this past Saturday, I got to talk with a sister that I haven't talked with since those days because
Really?
she left the home earlier than I did. She's like 4 or 5 years older than me, and
Really?
We just caught up, and so we spent a good part of the afternoon talking to each other on my birthday, which was a wonderful birthday present. I got to
How'd she
speak
find
with
you?
her. Oh, well, I
Or
have
did you find
another
her?
sister in California, and she lives. The oldest sister lives in Mexico, and so Debbie gave me Sabra's phone number, and we've, due to legal things and whatnot, they were somewhat afraid to get in touch because of some things. But anyway, once I got her phone number, I called her on my birthday, and that's the day I got the phone number, and we spent. And so that was that's where I learned about the governor and those things during those times. And she's of the opinion, I would tend to agree, one of the reasons that we have a heart that wants to help people, because she shares that heart. She went through tougher times than I did, but she shares that heart to this day, and adopted and those kind of things. And it's because of our grandmother who took us to church and did things. All that fell apart. And then for the next 4 or 5 years, I was in a very bad, broken home situation where abuse took place and neglect took place and those kind of things. But during that time, she had left, and by 13, she was on the streets on her own and all, and trying to take care of herself.
In California?
In California, yeah. And so and then she ended up later in life, and she's married and has adopted children and is doing well. So I'm glad of that. I've gotten to know 3 of my 4 sisters, and all of us are half siblings, okay? And then there's one I've still never connected with. And but you never know when the Lord will open those doors.
Sure. So you were in this hard situation for, you said, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah.
And then how did that situation change?
Well, the police started looking for me, and my mom began to realize, because I was doing the things I just described, and my mom began to realize that could look bad for her, because I think she would be the one charged with neglect and whatnot for the things because of the situation that we were in. So she contacted some cousins, 5th cousins in Ararat, Virginia, where my family originally was from, and asked if I could come live there. And we didn't have real strong family ties. And so when she asked me, when they finally agreed, they were very old. They were in their 70s. And when they finally said, okay, he can come, Mom asked me if I wanted to go. And the only question I had is if there was food on the plane, because that was my primary driving thing at the time, okay? And so I was put on the plane. I don't remember tears. I don't remember anything like that, because there weren't normal family bonds. None of that. There was just pain for the things that were happening during that time. And got to Virginia, and one of the best things that ever happened to me. The cousins were a lot like a foster home. we have foster homes today with Miracle Hill. And I lived there on a farm going from downtown Sacramento, a few blocks away from the Capitol building. Okay, that's where we would live in different places, but that was one of my favorite places to live. Going from downtown Sacramento, where trees were in the medians and around, but and everything, mostly just houses and all that, to West Virginia. To Winston-Salem, getting off in the plane and going, and then to Mount Airy with, you expect Marnie 5 and all that kind of thing, but it's a small town. And by then I'm down to 2-lane roads, but they're still hard topped. And then I go from that to gravel roads. And so I'm getting a little concerned, never been on a gravel road. Okay. And I'm in a Jeep truck in between two, what I consider ancient people and everything. And then they turn off of this very unsafe gravel road, in my estimation, onto a, what looked like just two paths, which was, driveway in the mountains of Virginia, and we go a half mile in, totally terrified. And then when the lights go off, I'm used to city lights all the time, cars going by. When I go to bed for the first time in the mountains, it's dark, and there's creatures that are making noise. I'm terrified. And then I found out I'm allergic to down pillows and all the things that they have in old country. They had just gotten electricity in this home the year before I got there. So
what year was this?
This was 1969.
Wow.
And when I got into that, and I stayed for 3 years there, and I learned how to work on a farm. I learned how to mow with a scythe and swing blade and all. I learned how to tend orchards and to tend gardens, and that boys had chores that we had to get done. I chopped wood. I hauled in the coal because that's how we heated our home.
Sure.
So it's all old school type things that we had that I learned. They were great skills that I carried on into life. But when while I was there, I was still interested in music in the church. I liked church because it had music. All right. And so I went from there was a Methodist church about a mile, and I would walk on Sundays to go to church when weather permitting, and I would go to church just so I could hear him singing and everything. Never did understand the preacher. He was one of those old mountain preachers, and that kind of thing. And so I never did really understand him. I really liked the Sunday school teacher. She talked, and she gave me my first Bible and all.
Our listeners just jumped in their cars or wherever
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's great. It's fine. It's fine. So they didn't go. The couple didn't go to church. You
Not really. I would go, and then we went to a church where they attended periodically, Bluemont Baptist Church up on top, off of the Parkway and whatnot. But I couldn't walk that far and everything. I liked it, and that's where they're buried, today. And everything's a beautiful rock stone church and whatnot. But going to the music, going to the the meals that they would have sometimes in the church and those kind of things. Food's still very important to me because here I am up in the mountains, and we're growing food, which I think is great. And in the fall, I could just go to any tree and just climb up a tree and start eating. And so, as you can tell by looking at me, food was very important in those days.
You had a food trauma from not having food as a young kid.
Yeah, it was tough days and whatnot. I never starved. Don't get me wrong, okay? You can't really starve in California, but you're hungry a lot, okay? It was very rare, I think, but as a child, I think that would have been noticeable to people, and people would have stepped in. But to try to find things to eat and to forage, it's a lot of work.
So you feel like you stabilized once you got to Virginia at some level? As
much as could be. I had no social training. When you're not raised by your mom and your dad's not there and you're pretty much living on the streets, I didn't know how to interact socially at all, okay? And those that know me as adults still say that's an issue and
you were
whatnot.
Like a feral animal.
I wasn't really feral, but I had problems with my language. I liked people, but I didn't know how to relate. I don't know if you've watched the movie Home Alone, and you watch when McCulkin was looking in the window when their family's gone, and he's walking down the street, and he looks in the window and sees the family that's having a Christmas time together, and he misses that. That was my childhood. right? Because I could see families. I was just never part of one, really. Even in the farm, I was so far away, I never had friends to play with. It was just living with 70-year-old people and whatnot. I learned how to read. I didn't know how to read until I got to Virginia. I learned a lot of skills, but I didn't learn how to relate to people. I got to hear stories and got roots because these people knew all my grandparents and uncles and all that stuff. So I got a lot of things, and it was a blessing. I'm not complaining, but I didn't learn the things that a mom and dad would teach you, just by watching them even. And then one of them died. Zeb died when I was 12. And Etta J, she was the mom, and she couldn't tend to me by herself. She was becoming feeble, and her son didn't want to take care of me.
Sure.
And I ended up going to Joy Ranch Home for Children for the next 6 years.
Also in Virginia?
Also in Virginia. This is where I got saved. There was a house parent, and I'm a firm believer in group homes. I like them in that with my social skills, that was probably a good place for me to be because I got to observe people in a different setting than I'd ever been part of. Problem is I learned how to be in a group home. I didn't learn how to be out in, it'd be like learning to live in a rescue mission.
You got institutionalized.
Yeah, it doesn't really train you how to be a dad or how to be a husband or how to be a father even. Starting out, once we had my son Ben, poor kid was raised with group home model and whatnot. My wife is from a broken home as well, and so hers was far more stable than mine, but it just made for interesting times as we were learning our roles that way.
So you got saved while you were in the group home. I'm taking it was a Christian group home.
Yeah.
And they took you to church?
Every day, not every day. We had our own service on campus, and then we would go to a mountain church, and then we went to Bible camps in the summer, those kind of things. But Miss Rhodes at the time, and now she's Mrs. Richards, but Miss Rhodes was teaching Sunday school class, and she had a class on being hot or cold or lukewarm, and the lukewarm got spit out. And I said, well, I'm not really hot. I've seen people like that. I'm not really cold. I like going to church and whatnot. I don't like the idea of getting spit out, though. So getting on the bus and driving back to the children's home, I was sitting in the chair with the director, which is never a good thing to a kid. So I'm in the chair, in the seat with Mrs. McHenry, and I said, Miss McHenry, do you think you can help me learn how to get saved? I know I need it, and I don't know how. So later, she says, well, we can talk about it in my office after lunch today. So we eat lunch, and then Tim Bowman and I start watching a Dallas Cowboys football game. And by then, I'd forgotten all about it, kids and everything. I was a Cowboys fan, and you don't miss a Cowboys game. And she called me into her office, and I'm thinking, what I do now? And whatnot. And she says, do you still want to get saved? I go, oh, yeah. I was all for the idea. I just forgotten about it and whatnot. And so we prayed, and I began reading my Bible in a whole new way. And I read through the Bible that year and began in try. That's when I started learning. Up until that point, I didn't know about the Spirit and guilt, and I didn't really feel guilty about the things I'd done and everything. And now when kids got careful around me because I would still try to do the things I was doing at the children's home, but then I'd go turn myself in for it. And so they didn't care for that. My friends didn't. And so I was not included in some of the hijinks, which was good too.
So it's said that we often get our first impression of God from our earthly father, and you grew up without an earthly father. So then you get to this, you have time in this house with this elderly couple, and then you wind up at the children's home. So how is that affecting your perception of who God was?
Starting out, I didn't have a perception of who God was, except I knew I didn't want to go to hell. Okay, that was it. And then one day, Papa McHenry, He's an albino man that was the co-director. He was Mrs. McHenry's husband, and he was a preacher and started a church in the area and decided to start a children's home. And so he was preaching on the verse that God would be a father to the fatherless. And that just spoke to me. And I'd never had a father. I'd had, by that time, Papa McHenry and Rick Richards and people like that were the male influences at the children's home. It was primarily run by women, and they were the only two men around at the time. And I would observe them and do things, but the whole concept of me having a father had never crossed my mind, that God would take care of me. That hadn't happened before, and I saw that I was put places, but that God had a plan for me. And that's when I started thinking about, okay, you're a guy that was on the streets of California, that ended up in the mountains of Virginia learning how to set up a wood stove and to use coal stoves and things that you'd never thought of doing before on the farm. And now you're in a group home and you're singing in a group that goes around to churches all over Virginia and North Carolina for support, and you're giving testimonies and things. God did something to me. I'm sorry.
Take your time.
He took charge of my life, and he protected me. That's what a dad does. And I can't help but be blessed that he's done that all my life. When I got a full scholarship to a state college to sing, and with a goal in my mind.
Really?
Yeah. I was going to go into the opera, and I had that kind of a big voice and whatnot. And I thoroughly enjoyed singing. I was being prepped for that. My choir teacher wanted me to go into that. My problem was I had a predilection toward alcohol. Turns out there's a lot of that in my family. And drugs. I didn't really care for drugs, but I loved getting drunk. Okay. And as a teenager, by the time of my senior year, I began to realize I had a problem. And that if I...
So you were doing this while in the group home?
Yeah, they never caught me. They caught me one time. I should have died at the beach. I really drank way, way too much, a fifth of vodka and a half a fifth of bourbon, and in one sitting. And I was, I was very, very sick the whole week. And I found out from doctors that I could easily have died from that. After that, I just started, I'd vowed to the Lord I wasn't going to drink anymore, all right? And I said, Lord, if you can use me, I want to serve you. I'd never given myself up for service. I'd always given myself up to be a Christian, but I always wanted to sing and whatnot. But I didn't know at the time that I could sing and serve the Lord. In my mind, singing was going the way of opera and those kind of things. I didn't know there was a way I could serve the Lord with music at the time. And so I went to my house parent and asked if I could go to Bob Jones. That's where he went to school, and a number of the other house parents. I said, I really want to study to be a preacher, because I thought that's how you serve the Lord and whatnot. And so he called some friends at Bob Jones, and I was entered in there. What was fun about this was I had no money. I was giving up a full scholarship, and they didn't really have that kind of scholarship system at Bob Jones. And they put it in a newsletter that I was going to go to Bob Jones, and people that had seen me singing for the past 6 years and testimony, and they started sending in money for my education. The only time I had to pay for school, now I had to work while I was in school, and I didn't mind doing that, but was when I got a motorcycle, and I said, Lord, I've got a job. I don't really need you to send any money right now. Put that where you need it, but I think I've got it. I got $2,000 in debt that semester. By the end of the semester, I said, Lord, I was wrong. I need you. And after that, the money came in again.
Really?
Right. It was amazing to watch the way that Lord answered prayer in those things.
So, and you meet Jane at some point.
I met Jane in the 10th grade.
Okay.
In high school.
In Virginia.
In Virginia,
Okay.
while I was at children's home. we would sit at lunch together. We were in choir together. We were in algebra. I actually met her in algebra, and I decided she looked like someone I wanted to get to know. Okay, and she was a Christian, and so that was good. But I didn't think I had that much to offer, except I found out she liked hearing stories about the streets. So I started telling stories of California and that I was in gangs. And it was 6 months before I told her most of what I was telling her was a lie, just because I wanted to talk to her. And she was so mad at me about it. So, but she never, after that, never fell for any of my stuff. I would do
Still not falling for it.
No, to this day, she's been my accountability partner and kept me straight on a lot of stuff.
So did she go to BJ as well?
Well, she started out, her dad and her mom and dad asked that she go to a state college first for a year. And during that time, we would write. This is before internet and all that kind of stuff. And so we would write, and I'd send her what I was learning from Matthew Henry's commentaries and those kind of things. And so we were corresponding, and I'd go visit her and whatnot. But she came our sophomore year to Bob Jones. But believe it or not, from the time in the 10th grade, I made a huge mistake. I told her we were going to get married. And in my mind, this was a done deal. I didn't want to get married yet, but she was the girl I was going to marry.
Sure.
And she was not really interested in considering a husband at that time.
The Lord had not told her that yet.
No, she had not heard the calling. And so it took me 8 years to confirm this with her. And she didn't date me through high school. Dated my best friend. That was a sore point, just to be honest with you. Now, we'd go on things. We had to raise money. We took a choir trip to Poland and traveled.
Really?
Yes. We did it for Jimmy Carter. We had a good choir. And because we did not just the classical music, we did bluegrass and country music and things like that. And so we had to broad enough of American culture. This was when Solidarity was just getting started in Poland. And so we got to tour Poland, but we had to raise money. It wasn't free. Jimmy Carter didn't pay for it. We had to pay for it. But so, yeah, that was, we would go around raising money all throughout Hillsville selling donuts. And I loved every minute of it because I was doing it with Jane because her mom would drive us. So
how do you get from a student at Bob Jones who thinks he's going to be a pastor so that he can sing for people to working at Miracle Hill and married?
We got married senior year. If you're young and if you're in college right now listening to this, don't get married till after college. I saw my wife more when we were dating than I did during our senior year after we got married, because you got to take care of all the bills. And again, and so anyway, we got married our senior year. And then she went on to get her. I took a year off and went and youth pastored for a year, so I was a year behind. And so during my senior year, she was in grad school getting her master's degree. And we prayed about. I'd actually looked into youth work and interviewed as a jail minister in Georgia and talked with someone about that ministry and gave it, but we never had peace about it. And then we heard about Miracle Hill and we prayed about Miracle Hill. Actually, we spent the night up praying that night after interviewing with Reed. And that's where we both had peace. There was never a second doubt about it. Then we drove up to the children's home and started in Singer Hall as house parents and whatnot. I had a lot of experience in group care, obviously, so I brought a pretty good skill set from that. I was still socially inept, all right, and so I fit in better in that group care environment. But Reed will tell you, if you ever ask him, there were a lot of rough edges that needed to be chiseled off and whatnot, and he was a great mentor during those times.
So you two went to work in the group home.
Yes.
And today life looks very different, but, walk through your chronology of roles at Miracle Hill.
Well, we have different chronologies. The first year we worked together, we were house parents as a team. And then I felt like I found out I could actually work in music and that was a career path. And I said I had no idea, but I thought about being a church choir, doing the leadership and music leader and whatnot. And so I started for a second degree in music education, thinking I might even teach in school. And with my Bible degree, I was lucky to get C's because I was working so much. Music, I was making straight A's and whatnot. It was not a problem. It was natural to me. It made sense and whatnot. So I took off, and during that time, I taught in Illinois Valley Christian School, Miracle Hill Children's Homes School. I would do support work off and on. At the same time, I was a custodian at Duncan Chapel Elementary. That was most of the 80s, actually, after late 80s, from 85. In 89, my one thing with the Lord was I said, Lord, I'll know you don't want me to go further with music when we start going into debt for this degree. All right, if you're not supplying, I just want you to show me.
You threw out a fleece.
I just said, Lord, when you want to open another door, I'm going to know that's the right door based on what's going on. And we started getting behind on the bills for the school. And that time, Reed came to me and asked me if I would start Miracle Hill Boys Shelter, at that time Palmetto Boys Shelter.
Right.
The state and the courts had asked that someone start an emergency shelter for boys, and they were housing boys and girls together in a shelter environment, and they were making their own business because the boys and girls were doing what boys and girls do. And so
they were contributing to their own problem.
There you go. And a judge, but the girl would claim she was raped, and the Judge Board at the time, he just got tired of this and said we had to get the guys separate. And because of my experience, Reed came to me and asked if I'd be willing to start the boys' shelter, and went on, and we started what turned out to be one of the best boys' shelters in the state. Because I told Reed, if we're going to do it, one, I wanted to try some things that had not been done in child care. Because one of my goals was, if I was going to run a group home, that I wanted to run one that I wouldn't mind my child going to if something happened to my wife and I. And so that was always my goal, that there was a safe place for kids to be. So I made 2 rules with Reed up front, and I said, these are the core foundational principles of a shelter. And I did a lot of research before I got it. Sure. I said, but I'm not going to turn anybody away. If they call me with teen, we're going to take them, and I'm not going to kick them out. I may send them to jail, but they're always going to be welcome to come back. If they have they do something illegal, they're going to get natural consequences. They're going to go to jail, and then we're going to bring them back. And our goal is always going to be, this isn't going to be your home. This is going to be where you can stay that's safe while we find a home for you. And for some of those kids, that was the first place that they'd ever come. And the state really tried us. They gave us some kids that, I had one child that was kicked out.
They challenged your rules.
Oh, yeah. They gave me one child that was kicked out of a mental hospital for being too violent and whatnot. And so we had to learn how to adjust. Turned out that kid was fine. He wasn't too violent. He did have a black belt, but he wasn't too violent. He just didn't want to, because of his education with his black belt, he didn't want to take the meds. And they were trying to force him. And he had ways not of being forced. And so when he came here and I said, are you going to hurt my staff? He goes, are they going to make me take meds? Not unless the doctor says you need something for it because you're sick. But if you're not going to get wild on me, then I see no reason for you to take those meds. And we were cool the rest of the time he was with us. And he went on and did well once I explained to DSS that they probably should calm down on the psychotropic medicines with him because he's fine.
So you thought you were going to be a pastor. And in a very real way, the Lord made you a pastor of boys just like you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a cool turn of events, right?
Yeah,
Lord
that
didn't make
was,
mistakes.
I had no idea. He'd prepped me. The music education made it so I can do plan of cares because the educational, plan their education, learning how to help them in ways I couldn't have done if I hadn't got the music education. And for the next 10 years, I was involved in helping teenage boys have a safe place to live and knowing that they would have a safe, because some of them would get kicked out of all the different group homes, but they would stabilize at the boys' shelter. And that's all I ever wanted was a safe place for kids to be when they didn't have a place. So if a kid was coming off the streets, he could feel at home and whatnot. I'm not saying it was idyllic by any stretch of the imagination. Sure. These kids were streetwise and they were tough. And matter of fact, I'm going to tell this story publicly on Reed. Should I?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Please.
This is a kind of thing. Reed, knowing that I'd worked a lot of hours and I was tired, and he said, "Bob, I can take care of the shelter for a day, and you go home and get some rest." And I said, "Okay, Reed, but are you sure? Because this is not like anything." He said, "Bob, I've been around group homes my whole life. I know what I'm doing. I can do it." I said, "Okay, if you think that's..." And at that time, we could use timeout rooms. We got out of that, but at that time, we were using timeout rooms.
Timeout room, for our listeners, is a padded room that somebody would go in and the door would get locked behind.
Well, it wasn't padded, but it'd have a chair, and it was just a place where if they're becoming violent, that we could take them where they can calm down.
Right.
And I always set the rule was, you can come out of here as soon as you're ready. All right. I never made it. It wasn't a punishment room. Yeah. It was a safety room, so that if they were out of control, until they got themselves in control. Once they got themselves in control, I let them come out, and then they can deal with their consequences. But
also for the listeners, this was super common back then for group homes to have these rooms. They no longer have these rooms.
Right.
But it was common back in the day.
That was the best we had with our skill set. Yeah. We learned more as we got into this and was able to teach better skills for staff and whatnot. But anyway, so Reed took over for the day, and I found out later from the kids and from him, that they had tricked him into the timeout room and locked him in for hours, and he was trying to talk them into letting him out. And he never volunteered to come over again after that.
Yeah, but he didn't.
And he was a lot more generous with me after that. So it was a good thing for both of us in some ways and whatnot. But it was a lot of kids got to feeling they could bond. I looked for staff that they could bond with, and it was amazing how the Lord would send certain staff for certain children, certain boys, and they would bond to those staff. And when those kids moved on, sometimes the staff moved on, and the Lord sent other staff. And it was just amazing how he met the needs. The Bible in Proverbs says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not in your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths." That goes for everything, okay? And he directs those things. And my father continued to work, and things that, frankly, I was amazed in other group homes, because we were using restraints when kids would become violent to keep them from being hurt in other group homes. And we moved away from that as time went on. But some kids had died from the restraints. God had always protected us. And we had very violent situations, but God protected us. Staff weren't hurt. And God was good and took care of us in those
So
times.
when did the Lord move you on away from the boy shelter?
Well, Reed asked me if I would come and be the director of the children's home. And this is back, my memory's fuzzy on some of this, but so I became director of Miracle Hill Children's Home to help transition it to be able to deal with more needy children in this way, because the philosophy we had at the boys shelter, Reed really wanted to go into all of our children's ministries. And so I moved up there for about 3 years, and then he asked me to be vice president of children's ministries, which I did for a few years after that. And then the Lord moved me, and I went to be CEO of 2 other group homes, one in Seneca and then an emergency shelter at the time here in Greenville. And then I came back to Miracle Hill, and the boys' shelter was about to close, and they asked me if I could help reorganize it and get it started, and it started open to run again at full swing. And but by then, I was not the same Bob that I was in my younger years, and the energy was no longer there, and I began to realize I needed to start looking into another career path, because I decided, I'd done the leadership thing, And really felt like I needed to find other ways to help and to serve. And I moved into IT. In fairness, I started the IT department in the 90s when we got a donation from Milliken of a bunch of computers, Windows 95 computers at the time. And we turned Shepherd's Gate. They had our first networked computer system there. And we got all the old computers and got them all set up, and enjoyed doing that. And Reed would give me projects because I would get bored, and so he would give me projects like that to do, and just to keep me busy sometimes and whatnot. And so,
we're a far cry from a few Windows 95 computers.
Yes, we have moved on, and now we have more of an enterprise type setup, and we have all of our computers and all of our locations are networked, and we've got 2 technicians, and I'm the IT manager, and so God is blessed.
So let's switch gears, and what I want to spend our last few minutes together doing is go back to the group home. And so, our listeners know that we help with foster care. They know that for many, many years we operated a bunch of group homes, varying types, with the children's home and the boy shelter and Homes for Life. But if you've not had the experience you have, you probably don't know what that's like. So I want to try to put our listeners into the shoes of somebody who has walked through group home and has had the experience of being pulled from support and safety and placed into a group home. So walk us through what it felt like the day that you had to leave this woman who could no longer take care of you, and you're walking into a group home for the first time.
When I left California, there were no tears. I just wanted to get on the plane and go, because there was a meal on the plane, okay? When I left Ararat to go to Woodlawn, Virginia, to the group home, I was bawling, okay? I did not want to leave. Later, I heard that Eddie couldn't, that the farm was not being tended to, and I was ready to leave the group home, and I was going to, as a 13-year-old, learn how to run the farm by myself, okay? And I was going to save the family farm and all that. And so, because that's where my roots were, okay? That's what I wanted to be part of. And I didn't get to go back and visit that. They came and visited me one time, and I think it just hurt them too much. And these were mountain people, so they didn't travel a lot anyway, They stayed on the farm. And so I went and visited one time when I was closer to graduating, and I didn't have a lot of visits and those kind of things, but that was where my roots were. Joe Ranch taught me a good many things, how to serve, what it was to minister and whatnot, but it wasn't a home. And I used to say when I was running group homes that there needed to be group homes for people like me, because I wasn't sure that I would do well in a foster home environment. I've reconsidered that, because I did okay with the Dillons, that's who I lived with, and I loved being with them.
Which was essentially a foster home.
It was a foster home, all right? And I learned a lot with them, and had they been closer to parenting age instead of great-grandparenting age, that would have been even a more valuable experience. So I just wanted somewhere I could bond. Now, a lot of kids don't when they first start out, because they feel like they're not holding up their own family and whatnot. But if a foster parent can be patient, and if they can learn that there are socially inept people that don't know how to react in a family environment, they don't know how to take love and accept it, that they deserve it, and that it's okay to be loved, and doesn't mean that they're going to be sexually abused. It doesn't mean that they won't be safe at night when they're in their bed. All right. If they can learn that in a foster home, that is probably one of the most valuable lessons you can get, because that security is something missing in someone that's raised in a group home sometimes. All right. In a group home, you get a lot of brothers. We fought like brothers. We did a lot of things, and I honestly don't regret Joy Ranch. I think they did a lot of good things for me, but it was limited, all right, in the sense that if I could have a lot more attention from my foster parents, and I would have needed one that didn't have 6 kids. I would have needed one because I would have probably been a good bit to handle at the beginning and whatnot. When I was in California, they put me in a mentally handicapped class when I was in the 3rd grade, thinking I didn't, because of my social issues. And the fact is I was processing abuse and all that kind of thing. And so rationally, I couldn't learn. Okay, I just was not at that point where I could absorb knowledge.
You were in survival mode.
Yes, I was in survival mode. If I'd been in a foster home, I learned how to read in the 4th grade the first year I was in school, thrived on it and whatnot because I was safe. Had that continued throughout, when I got in the group home, frankly, there was one foster parent house parent that abused me, and things happen like that, and then you have all the tensions of group life, and so it's a lot higher stressed than it would be in a foster home, where you can actually talk about what happened at night. And in the group home, you have to try to out-eat the other boys to get seconds and things like that. It's always a competition to see who can stay on top and get on the pecking order and not, look stupid in front of everybody and all those things. In a foster home, you don't have that kind of dynamic, and kids can relax.
So when you left California and then went through the 6 years with that couple and you wind up in this Joy Ranch group home, did you have communication with your mom and your sisters? I mean, you talked about earlier about connecting with the sister after 50 years or something. Did you have communications? And the second part of the question is, I feel like as a child, you would think about that all the time. Where's my family? When are they coming to get me? So was that your experience, or did you just accept that they weren't?
No, that wasn't really my experience. I talked to my mom, I think, twice the whole time I was in the group in my childhood, in the 9 years after I left California. I can remember talking to her, and I was mad at her after the second one because I was 15 and wanted her to sign my driver's license so I could drive, and she wouldn't. So I was not happy at that point in time. I'm a teenager and not real bright anyway, and so anyway, there wasn't a lot that way, and I was used to being on my own, and before I left, there wasn't a lot of family ties. To this day, while I love getting to know my sisters, and I'm trying to build that, but the fact is, it's been 50 years, and we like the fact we share stories of what's happened and whatnot since. But my family is my son and my grandchildren and my wife and her family and those kind of things. And all of us have built separate lives that way.
What about the boys when you were at the boys' shelter? Did you feel like that was generally their experience, is that they were just waiting for their family?
No, they had most of them had a separate experience. They were pulled away for neglect, but they wanted to be home.
Right.
All right. And so, or they wanted to be somewhere safe, but most kids really don't care for the group environment, just to be honest with you. And then it starts, and so they wanted to be back home, and they didn't want to bond with anybody else. And so there were some like me that were that way, and that really, but there's quite a few that don't have, today they call it attachment disorder. All right. And some kids will not want to attach at all, or they're bounced from foster home to foster home or group home to group home. So then they can't attach because of fear and those kind of things. Happily, I didn't have that. I went to that one foster home, and then I went to one group home, and I saw other kids were getting kicked out for behavior. So I did stuff, but I was bright enough not to sneaky enough to not get caught so much until I learned to turn myself in, which was not helpful, but it was helpful in character building. And so, it was.
Do you think that the time in the group home added to or subtracted from the trauma that you had already had along the way?
Yes.
Both?
Yeah. There were times it added, and it added in different ways than the previous trauma. There was really nothing a house parent could do that was worse than what I went through, okay? You couldn't have hurt me physically any worse, okay? Emotionally, you couldn't have hurt me much worse. There were a few exceptions, but for the most part, it was not within their realm of ability to go, because they wouldn't go that far. They were Christians, okay? They were doing what they thought was right. Most of the time when they hurt me, it was by mistake or because there was a language barrier. They would tell me not to talk back and then ask me a question. I had no idea what talking back meant. Okay, so there was a language barrier for a kid that didn't know when they were telling me to be respectful. I had no idea what that meant. Okay.
So in your experience, both in the system and then helping to manage within the system and as a believer, how do you believe that that group homes or foster care in general is close to the heart of God?
I know foster care is. If a family's willing to take a child to church, if a family is willing to parent them and to be a model, because that is the model. And that's when Reed and I began working in group care together. We had come to a conclusion that we wanted all of our house parents to be couples, and we didn't really want shift work. The federal government finally made us run shift work, but that wasn't the model we wanted. We wanted a family environment as much as possible so that those parents could train and the kids. That's what's needed, because again, remember, I had a mom. I could recognize her, but it didn't really feel like a parent. I didn't have a bond, as it were, that way. And that's what's missing in a lot of our kids. When they are neglected and they're hungry and they're in survival mode and all those kind of things, they need that family to begin to realize there is a safety net. There is something out there, and you can have that for you and then later for your kids. Jane and I just both made up our minds that we never wanted our family to go through this. All right. And we wanted, she went into running foster homes and was counseling parents and those kind of things. Our goal was reunification, because we wanted kids that could be reunited with their families. Sure. And when doing that, back in those days, we did a lot of training with the parents so that they would know how to parent their children and know how to keep their kids safe and those kind of things. And we spent a long time. When we brought them into the group home, one of the rules were, we want your children to come home. We don't want them to stay here. We want those beds to open up for other kids that need help. So you need to be involved in this and come in for counseling.
We just had a story of rescue here recently about a couple who's been foster parents for many years on and off, have served, I think, 23 children across the years. And I think the main point of their story was, you know, the agreement when you become a foster parent is that you're essentially agreeing to get your heart broken, right? Like you're agreeing to step in and be Jesus to this child or children, knowing that the goal is that their family stabilizes and they leave. I think people have a misconception about that. They think that they get into foster care so that they can get a kid. But the goal in a perfect world is that the kid goes back home.
There are a lot of successes, but I'm going to say something that's going to make me cry possibly. But I would get children in that were, the ones that would break my heart were the 2, 3, and 4, and 5-year-olds, and they would come in, and in my mind, they're totally innocent. And when they had been beaten, sexually abused, and those kind of things, and they would be afraid, and I would have to walk them to their rooms and sit in front of their doors, and my staff would sit in front of their doors. We would hear their stories where they'd and have to turn in where had a 9-year-old that came in and she was pregnant. All right, those children coming in are broken in so many ways, and they need someone to love on them, and then you bond to them, and you want to, and you don't have good feelings about these parents that are coming to visit, but then you know the goal is for them to go somewhere, and so your heart's broken when you get them, and your heart's broken while you're working with them and trying to help them heal, and your heart's broken as you watch this child that you this child you've learned to love. And I'm sorry, I'm envisioning kids.
No, you're getting me too bad.
And you have to watch them go, and you know they may not be safe still. And they end up coming back. And that's the nature of the system, and it breaks your heart. And you watch these kids as they go on this merry-go-round of pain. And the only time they feel safe is when they're in that place where you've made a safe place for them. It's worth that pain.
It's worth that pain.
It's worth that pain.
So what would you say to the couple that's listening to this that feels like God may be calling them into foster care? What would you say to them as someone who was a child in the system?
No, it's a sacrifice. This is not going to be where someone's going to come in and throw their hands and say, thank you for saving me. They're not going to say, I love you for a long time sometimes. They're going to be hard to work with. They're going to fight you. But in the end, it's because of where they came from. It's because of what they've endured. It's because of what they've been taught. And if you want to go through the pain I just described of teaching them new things that they can be loved, and if you can be patient and kind and gentle during that time and understand the rejection will hurt. It's not going to be simple. You can make people did that for me. During the times when I lied and all the other things I did, they still loved me. And they helped me. And they helped me onto a course where I can learn how to minister and to help others. Those are saints. Those are people that make a difference. And if you want to be part of that, I can't think of a higher calling. Because I'm one that was saved. You've heard the story of the starfish, and you can't save all of them. But I'm one of the ones that got thrown back in the water and was able to heal and have a family and do so much that I'd never envisioned when I was a kid on the streets of California, how God would use me. And so I'm blessed, but I'm blessed because people were a blessing to me, not because I'm great or smart, but because those people sacrificed and put up with a really hard to work with child.
I mean, you can still be hard to work with now.
I'm aware of this. But those people made a difference. And if people that are listening feel called, they can make a difference.
Do you keep in touch with any of those people?
Through Facebook. Yeah. There are some of us that talk on Facebook. The gentleman that married Jane and I, I was his youth pastor when he left the children's home and went to pastor and whatnot. I was his youth pastor, and so he and I will speak sometimes on in Facebook and whatnot. And I went to one or two reunions, but again, Miracle Hill's my home now, Natural Ridge, and so.
Well, will you do us the honor of closing us in prayer and praying for the boys and girls that are in the system and maybe the families that are praying about whether or not they want to be part of the solution?
All right. Father, we thank you for this time that we can talk together. We thank you for the ministry of child care. We pray, Lord, that you would work in the children that are currently in foster homes. Help them to find a place of healing. Help the foster parents to learn and give them the patience and the wisdom to know how to reach out in a way that can make a difference, Lord. Lord, I know so many kids left the group homes and the foster homes, and they fought us, and they determined that they hated us, but when they got into life, they called back and said, thank you for what was done. And Lord, we pray that if there's people that are out there considering to be foster parents, that you'd give them a heart to realize that it's work, it will disrupt their families, but Lord, they will make a difference that will save not just that child, but possibly a whole family where the grandchildren will be in safe homes down the road. Lord, we pray that you'd help them to help us break the cycle of abuse and create a place of healing for some broken children. Pray this in your name. Amen.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, man, it was a pleasure. My pleasure to spend time with you. Bye, everybody.